Neil Diamond. 1959. A university campus in New York. A young man enrolled in pre-medicine on a fencing scholarship. His parents' plan, his neighborhood's expectation, the practical future that everyone who loved him had agreed was the right one. He picked up a guitar. He never went back to medicine. What happened in the years between that guitar and the first stadium show is not a simple story about a kid who chose music over a career. It is a story about the specific cost of becoming who you actually are, and the moment a person understands that the cost is worth paying regardless of what it means for everyone who expected something else from them. This is that story. Neil Leslie Diamond was born in Brooklyn, New York, on January 24, 1941. His father, Akiba Diamond, ran a dry goods store. His mother kept the household. They were a working-class Jewish family in a neighborhood that produced working-class Jewish families, people who believed in practical things. Steady work, reliable income, the dignified security of a life that didn't require anything as uncertain as talent to sustain. Neil was a quiet child, an observer. He watched the neighborhood from windows and from stoops and from the backseat of cars, filing things away in the particular way that people file things away when they are going to use them later, though they don't know that yet. He was not the kind of boy who announced himself. He was the kind who paid attention. His parents noticed that he was smart. They steered the smart toward medicine. Medicine was what smart boys from their neighborhood were supposed to do. It was a known quantity, a respected profession, the kind of future that a parent could describe to other parents without qualification or explanation. Their son was going to be a doctor. Neil enrolled at New York University on a fencing scholarship in 1959. He was 18 years old. He was studying pre-med. He was doing what he was supposed to do. And then, at a summer camp the year before, a guitar had arrived in his hands. The guitar did not arrive dramatically. Nobody placed it there with the intention of changing anything. It was simply available, one of those ordinary accidents that turn out to be the hinge on which an entire life turns, and Neil picked it up because it was there and because something in him needed to find out what it was like to hold it. What it was like was immediate. Not the mastery, that took years, the kind of years that only discipline produces. But the recognition. The sense of having found the language he had been looking for without knowing he was looking for anything. He began writing songs almost immediately. Not polished ones, not yet. But honest ones. Songs that said things that had no other available form, that reached toward feelings too complicated or too private for ordinary conversation, that found in melody and lyric a precision that was simply not available anywhere else. He sat in his NYU dorm room at night, the medical textbooks open on the desk, the guitar in his hands, and began to understand something that he could not have explained to anyone around him. He was in the wrong room. Not the dorm room. The life. The planned, practical, sensible life that everyone who loved him had assumed he was building. That life was the wrong room. The right room had a guitar in it. The right room was wherever the songs were. He did not drop out of NYU immediately. He was not impulsive. He was the kind of person who needed to be certain before he moved, who needed to hold an understanding long enough to know it was real before acting on it. He continued the pre-med coursework. He continued the fencing. He continued doing what was expected. And he kept writing songs. The songs accumulated. Night after night the guitar. Morning after morning the medical textbooks. He was living in two lives simultaneously, and the two lives were not compatible, and he was the only one who could see clearly enough to understand which one was real. His parents did not see it. They saw a son doing well at university, on track for medicine, fulfilling the future they had planned with him. They saw the guitar as a hobby, the healthy kind, the kind that reasonable young men have and then set aside when adult life requires their full attention. Neil saw it differently. There is probably something in your own life that you knew was right before you had any evidence it was right. Something you understood before you could explain it. Drop it in the comments, because what Neil Diamond was carrying in that dorm room was exactly that. He left NYU before completing his degree. He did not announce it as a grand gesture or frame it as a declaration. He simply stopped going to classes and started going to Tin Pan Alley instead, the strip of publishing offices on West 28th Street in Manhattan where the music business happened, where songwriters brought their compositions and hoped that someone with a checkbook would hear what they heard. His parents' reaction was what you would expect from parents who had planned a different future. His father, in particular, found it difficult to process. Akiba Diamond had built everything he had through the steady, practical application of effort to known quantities. His son was proposing to build a life on something that had no known quantity, talent, which either found its market or it didn't, and which offered no guarantees of any kind. The conversation between them was not easy. Neil did not change his mind. Tin Pan Alley in the early 1960s was not romantic. It was the grinding, anonymous work of writing songs that might or might not find performers who might or might not record them, for amounts that might or might not cover the cost of the subway. Neil wrote. He submitted. He was rejected. He revised. He submitted again. He was occasionally accepted. A composition purchased for $20, $30, amounts that confirmed he had talent without confirming that talent was going to be enough. He wrote songs for other people during this period. Songs that disappeared into the industry machinery and emerged under other names on other records. He learned the craft through the most efficient available method, writing things that actual commercial processes evaluated and responded to, learning from every rejection what was missing, learning from every sale what had worked. The medical textbooks receded further and further into the past. By 1962 they were gone entirely. By 1963 he was a working songwriter, not a successful one by any meaningful measure, not a household name, not someone whose story had become a story yet. Just a man who had chosen a guitar over a guaranteed future and was in the process of discovering whether the choice had been correct. The answer was not coming quickly. The answer was not coming at all for a while. There were years, real, extended, grinding years, when the choice looked like it might have been wrong. When the practical future that he had declined seemed, from the vantage point of a barely furnished apartment and a checking account that did not cover the rent, not like the wrong room but like the room he should have stayed in. He kept writing anyway. This is worth saying directly because it is the part of the story that the eventual success makes easy to gloss over. The years between leaving NYU and writing the first hit were not a montage. They were actual years, each of which had to be lived through at full length, with all the doubt and financial pressure and social consequence that a choice like his carried. His parents worried. His neighborhood thought he was foolish. The music industry was indifferent in the specific way that large industries are indifferent to individual talent. Not hostile, simply unimpressed, moving through its processes without particular regard for whether the person submitting work was a future legend or a cautionary tale. He kept writing. And then in 1966, Bang Records. And then Cherry Cherry and Solitary Man. And then the audiences. The first time Neil Diamond performed his own songs in a room where people had come specifically to hear him was not a revelation in the conventional sense. Not a thunderclap of validation that resolved all the years of uncertainty in a single moment. It was more gradual than that and more real. It was the slow accumulation of evidence that the room he had walked into was, in fact, the right room. That the songs found people. That the voice found people. That what he had been building in the dorm room and the Tin Pan Alley offices and the barely furnished apartments had been building toward something that actually existed. The rest, the arenas, the albums, the songs that became part of the cultural fabric, followed. Not because Neil Diamond was lucky. Not because the music industry recognized genius and rewarded it appropriately. But because a young man from Brooklyn had picked up a guitar in 1958, had written songs in a dorm room while his medical textbooks sat open and unread on the desk, had left the practical future behind and walked into the music business with no guarantee and no fallback and no map. And had kept writing. Every day. For as long as it took. His father lived to hear Sweet Caroline in a stadium. He did not entirely understand it, the scale of it, the way a song could do what that song did to a room of people, the specific mechanism by which his son's voice had found its way into the lives of that many strangers. But he heard it. And he understood enough. His son had been right. The guitar had been the right room. The medicine had been the wrong one. And the career that followed the decision made in a dorm room in 1959, the decision that was never announced and never explained and never defended, that was simply lived out over the course of a lifetime of songs, was the answer to every reasonable person who had looked at a 20-year-old fencing scholarship student studying pre-med and seen only one possible future. There was always another one. He just had to pick up the guitar to find it. What the dorm room years produced was not simply songs. They produced a songwriter who understood, from the inside, the full cost of choosing the uncertain over the guaranteed, and who had paid that cost without flinching and without turning back. That knowledge is in the music. Not literally. Not as lyrical subject matter. But structurally, in the way that a person who has genuinely risked something writes differently from someone who hasn't. The willingness to say the difficult true thing rather than the comfortable approximate one, to hold a lyric to the standard of honesty rather than the standard of what will be well received. That willingness is only available to someone who has already demonstrated, in their own life, that they are willing to accept the cost of honesty. Neil Diamond left medicine. He chose the guitar. He spent years in the music business being nobody in particular, learning a craft in the most unforgiving available environment, writing songs that nobody heard and then songs that a few people heard and then songs that everyone heard. The transition was not clean. The arrival was not swift. The path between the dorm room in 1959 and the first stadium show was not the inspirational straight line that retrospective tellings often make it. It was simply the path, with all its length and its uncertainty and its years that had to be lived at full length before the next one arrived. He walked it, all the way to the end, and never once picked up the medical textbooks again. The question that his father could never quite answer, why would a smart boy throw away a guaranteed future for something as uncertain as music, is, in a certain light, the wrong question. The right question is, what happens when a person who has found their language is asked to stop speaking it? Neil Diamond's language was songs. It had been since the summer camp guitar, since the dorm room desk, since the first night he sat with a legal pad and a melody and understood that the things he needed to say had a form and that the form was this. Medicine was not his language. Medicine was another person's plan for him, a plan made with genuine love and genuine care by people who wanted him to have a stable life and had no framework for understanding that the life they were planning was not the one he was going to be able to live. He did not resent the plan. He did not reject it out of rebellion. He left it the way you leave a room that was never yours, not with drama, but with the quiet certainty of someone who has found the door they were looking for and is simply walking through it. The fencing scholarship ended. The medical courses faded. The guitar stayed. And what grew from the guitar, across 60 years of writing and performing and finding the people who needed the songs he needed to write, was a life so completely itself that the alternative future feels, in retrospect, not like a tragedy avoided but like a fiction that was never really possible. He was always going to pick up the guitar. The only question was when. The answer was 1958 at a summer camp in upstate New York, when an instrument was available and a hand reached for it and something clicked into place that never came loose again. The rest, as the title says, is history. But the history started there, not in a stadium, not on a record label, not in any of the places where careers announced themselves. In the quiet moment before any of it, when a boy who had been told what he was going to be picked up something entirely different and found out who he actually was. There is a version of this story that ends differently. In that version, Neil Diamond stays at NYU. He completes the pre-med program. He goes to medical school. He becomes a doctor, a good one probably because the qualities that made him a great songwriter, the precision, the willingness to attend carefully to what is actually there rather than what is expected, the refusal to accept the approximate when the exact is available, those same qualities make good doctors. He practices medicine in Brooklyn or in Manhattan. He has patients who trust him. He has a stable life that his parents are proud of. He never performs in front of anyone. He never writes a song that a stranger hears on the radio and feels less alone because of. He lives a full and decent life and dies without having made the specific contribution to the world that only he could have made. That version of events is not a tragedy in any dramatic sense. It is simply the loss of something the world did not know it was going to need. The guitar prevented it. Not the guitar alone, the hand that reached for it, the mind that recognized what it found there, the discipline that turned the recognition into craft, the stubbornness that kept the craft going through the years when it produced nothing the industry wanted to buy. All of that. But it started with the guitar. And it never looked back.